Some doors should never be opened. Some realities should remain forgotten. But Malika had no choice. A woman consumed by bitterness, lost between hatred and solitude, now faces something far worse than her own pain. A place where suffering is eternal, where shadows have eyes, where every step pulls her deeper into a fate with no escape. She crossed the portal. Now the question isn't whether she'll return, but how long she can survive. Welcome to the beginning of the end. Chapter 1. The portal to the abyss. Malika had always been different from other women. Life had squeezed her. Circumstances had shaped her into a bitter and lonely soul. Loss, disappointment, and constant pain had stripped her heart of any trace of kindness or joy. She was a woman consumed by anger, sadness, and an unrelenting dissatisfaction with everything and everyone around her. People, situations, time itself, everything contributed to making her more closed off and distant with each passing day. Deep inside, Malika felt lost, like a wandering soul with no direction, no purpose, drifting through a world that had nothing left to offer her. In moments of silence, when she isolated herself in her own space, she often lost herself in thoughts that didn't belong anywhere. Enigmas, mental labyrinths, and disturbing visions of distant worlds filled her mind, like reflections of her inner torment. It was as if she traveled to other dimensions, where monstrous creatures and dark entities imprisoned in suffering watched her. But over time, these worlds began to merge with her reality in an increasingly intense way, becoming almost tangible to Malika. One day, as she sank into yet another of her mental wanderings, Malika felt a strange sensation of displacement. It was as if something was pulling her out of her body, out of her world. Before she could understand what was happening, a cold sensation enveloped her, and suddenly she found herself in an unfamiliar place, a place that was not of this earth, a place where darkness seemed to have a form of its own, a substance that weighed heavily in the air. The first thing Malika noticed was the massive portal before her, a towering steel gate that seemed to stretch infinitely upward and downward, with no end. The place around her was dark and oppressive, and she couldn't comprehend how she had ended up there. As she looked around, all she could see were shifting shadows, a dense dust covering the ground, and a putrid stench that seemed to emanate from everything around her. Distant screams, voices chanting in what sounded like an ancient language, like a distorted form of Latin, echoed through the walls. But these voices did not belong to humans. They were deeper, more primal, as if they belonged to entities that were not of her world. The sensation of being trapped in a nightmare only grew stronger as she struggled to understand what was happening. She looked around, searching for some kind of explanation. But the only sound that surrounded her was a muffled growl, something monstrous, blending with the noise of the wind and the voices. Malika felt her body tense with fear. But what happened next made her freeze in terror. The gate before her began to move. Slowly but relentlessly, the steel bars started to open. The sound it made was like metal scraping against stone, sharp and unbearable, sending shivers down her spine. As the gate opened wider, an icy wind began to blow, pulling Malika inward. She tried to resist, tried to scream, but her voice was lost in the wind. The force dragging her was indescribable, something beyond her comprehension. Unable to fight against the pressure, Malika was pulled inside, and the gate slammed shut behind her with a thunderous crash that nearly made her bones tremble. At that moment, she knew she was trapped. She had lost herself in an unknown world, a place where evil manifested in ways she had never imagined. Malika felt pure terror consume her as the creatures that inhabited this underworld watched her with hungry, malevolent eyes. Chapter 2. The castle of shadows. Malika barely had time to process what was happening. The world around her was completely different, a distorted vision of the reality she once knew. Fear consumed her, but the only thing she could do was move forward, not knowing whether she was heading in the right direction or sinking even deeper into this endless nightmare. As she walked slowly, trying to understand where she was and what was wrong with this place, an eerie sensation of being watched enveloped her. The air was heavy, thick with a dense mist that crawled across the ground, mixing with the nauseating stench rising from the soil. But the worst part was the deathly silence, broken only by sounds that seemed to come from all directions. Distant noises of creatures, muffled screams lost in the darkness, echoes of something lurking nearby. She tried to ignore it, but her footsteps quickened as the feeling of being watched grew stronger. That was when she saw it. A massive structure towering in the distance, a castle, but not just any castle. This one was colossal, imposing, ancient. Its towers vanished into the darkness, and its stone walls seemed to emanate an oppressive, sinister energy. As she approached, the castle revealed itself to be even more terrifying. With each step, the sense of despair deepened. The stairways surrounding it seemed to move as if they were alive, and the ground was covered in black moss that clung to her feet, as if trying to trap her there forever. The air was thick with a putrid scent, as if the very structure were decaying. Malika knew she couldn't stay there for long. She felt the pressure of something evil around her, something watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. When she looked back, she realized there was no way out. The portal she had passed through was now closed, and her only option was to move forward, to try to find an escape, if one even existed. Without thinking, she ran toward the massive spiral staircases before her. They were enormous, shifting erratically as if they had a will of their own. Malika knew she couldn't stop because she could feel it. Something was behind her. Something was following her, waiting for the perfect moment to seize her. As she climbed, the sound of footsteps behind her grew closer. Something or someone was coming after her. She dared not look back, but the sensation of being hunted was undeniable. Malika climbed with all her strength, but it felt as if she were trapped in an endless nightmare. The wind howled, the thick mist grew denser, and the creatures, ones she could only hear, seemed to be closing in. Her steps became more frantic, more desperate, but then suddenly a siren blared, a loud piercing sound that made her freeze for a moment. What was happening now? The siren seemed to be summoning something lurking in the shadows waiting to strike. The sound echoed through the castle, and the staircases began to shift more violently, making her ascent even more perilous. As she struggled to climb, she felt the creatures drawing closer, their presence intensifying with every passing second. And then, at the top of the stairs, she saw a door. Hope? Perhaps. But she knew she couldn't trust anything in this place. The creatures moved in unison, as if playing with her, enjoying her desperation. Their eyes glowed like embers, like predators hunting their prey. With her heart pounding and adrenaline surging through her veins, Malika had no choice but to take a risk. She leaped onto another staircase, but in a cruel twist of fate, it spun in the opposite direction from where she needed to go. It didn't matter. She was determined to fight against whatever sinister force was keeping her here. With aching feet, she kept trying until finally, she succeeded. The staircase shifted in the right direction, and she found herself before a massive door. As she stepped through it, what she encountered was even more terrifying. Chapter 3. The Iron Hellas. Malika stepped through the door. She found herself in a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The stone walls were damp, covered in a black moss that exuded an unbearable stench of decay. The floor was slick with a thick, dark liquid that spread across the entire path. She didn't know what it was, but a chill ran down her spine as the cold, viscous substance touched her skin. Everything in this place felt alive, as if it were draining her energy, as if the very structure of the castle was breathing along with her. Malika forced herself to move forward, but fear gripped her body. What else could she possibly encounter? Here, what else could happen? But she knew she had no choice. She couldn't stop. No matter how exhausted she was, no matter how much her feet ached, she had to keep going, or she would be even more trapped in this endless nightmare. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, and the sounds around her began to grow louder. Strange noises and metallic scraping echoed through the halls as if something was moving within the shadows. Suddenly, she spotted faint lights ahead, but they weren't torches as she had expected. It was a weak glow seeping from beneath the doors along the corridor as if something was moving behind them, waiting to emerge. Terror took hold of Malika, but she pressed on. Each step was harder than the last. She tried not to look to the sides, because she knew that whatever was lurking in the shadows could see her, could sense her presence. She felt as though she was being watched, and when she stole glances at the corners of the hallway, she saw nothing. But she could feel the eyes, the presence of something malevolent. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Malika reached the first door. It was rusted and locked, but something inside her compelled her to touch it, to see what lay beyond. The door groaned as she pushed, and with monstrous effort, she managed to open it. What she saw left her speechless. Inside the room, there were several human-like figures, or at least what seemed to be human figures. They were bound, chained up, their bodies grotesquely distorted, as if something had tortured them without mercy. But the worst was yet to come. The room was filled with thick smoke, and the stench was unbearable. Foul gases hissed from the floor, and the sound of moans and distant screams echoed against the walls. Malika nearly fainted from the shock, but she forced herself to keep her eyes open, trying to take in everything around her. She knew this was only the beginning of an even greater horror. The creatures that had been mere whispers in the shadows now revealed themselves in all their grotesque glory. Faceless beings draped in black cloaks and hoods, their eyes glowing with a sinister red light, watched her every move, as if they had been waiting for her. She couldn't understand what they were planning, but the fear she felt was suffocating. Desperately, she searched for a way out. But the doors were locked. There was no escape. The only path was to keep moving through the dark corridors, trying not to be seen by the creatures that seemed to be getting faster, closing in on her, as if they knew exactly where she was. Meanwhile, the air grew heavier. Malika felt the pressure of the darkness closing in around her, and the only thing keeping her conscious was the desperate need to escape. She slipped through the shadows, avoiding detection by the creatures that hunted her. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but she knew that would only draw more attention to herself. Then she came upon a second door, a massive iron-forged door like all the others, but with one difference: it was slightly open. Without thinking, Malika stepped closer, her trembling hand reaching for it. She pushed it open gently and stepped inside. What she found on the other side was even more horrifying. The room was filled with children, but not ordinary children. They were strapped into torture devices, their bodies stretched and twisted in impossible ways, their agonized screams reverberating through the corridors. Malika felt her stomach knot, an overwhelming despair taking hold of her heart. She wanted to flee, couldn't bear to witness this any longer, but she knew she had no choice. She had to keep going. She had to survive. And that was when she realized there was no more way out. There was nothing left but suffering and pain. The creatures began to close in, surrounding her, as if they had come to claim her soul as well. The corridor seems to close in around Malika. The sensation is suffocating, as if the very air is being drained from the space, leaving behind only a dark and oppressive void. Every step she takes is a sacrifice. Her body begs her to stop, but something inside her knows that stopping would mean the end. But does continuing mean something better? The door ahead remains slightly open, like an invitation or a trap. The faint light emanating from the other side flickers like a flame on the verge of going out. Something moves in the darkness beyond. The door, not an ordinary shadow, but something that feels alive, pulsing, aware of her presence. She hesitates for just a second, and then she realizes the silence around her has changed. She is no longer alone. Fear spreads through her body like an electric current. A shiver runs down her spine. She knows she cannot turn around. She knows she cannot face what is there. But she can feel it. The warm, damp, icy breath against her skin, the stench of rotting flesh, damp earth, rusted metal. And then, something touches her shoulder. Cold, slimy. Long, thin fingers slowly tighten against her skin. She wants to scream, but she can't. Her throat is locked, as if the darkness itself has crawled down her mouth and tightened around her vocal cords, sucking the voice from her. Malika throws herself forward, crossing the door without thinking. And then, she has no idea what she has found on the other side. But you will want to know. In the next chapter, Malika will face horrors that go beyond physical pain, beyond fear, because some doors should never be opened. And you? Would you have opened that door? If the answer is yes, then don't you dare miss the next episode. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the darkness already knows your name and it is waiting.